So this is what I'm going to be walking you through today. I'll just give a bit of context what this survey is and how it's conducted, the key highlights from this survey, the main findings, a few areas for improvement, and then we've got a few questions to discuss with you at the end. So the Communication Perception Survey is a survey that we run every 2 years to gauge the perception of our communication activities. It was carried out in 2022 during the month of September, and thank you for those of you who took the time to respond. It's quite a long survey. There are 87 questions, 65 are quantitative and 22 are qualitative. So you have to write answers to 22 questions. It's not a quick survey, but it's incredibly helpful and rich for us. So in addition to gauging and seeing how we're doing in terms of our communication, also helps us to identify challenges and opportunities, and of course, to see where we can improve as we move forward. It covers both engagement and communication, if you want to view things separated in that manner. So with communication, openness and transparency, the type of materials and tools that we use, our websites, and in this survey, COVID-19, of course. We also have questions specifically for national competent authorities about our engagement with them. For example, the early notification system, which I'm sure you're aware of, and lines to take. And last but not least, with stakeholders such as yourselves. So in the 2022 survey, we had 375 responses, and the stakeholder groups are listed there, and you can see patients, consumers, and carers popping up there. And the partners also responded. So these are the target audiences. It's important for you to understand this is not a survey of EU citizens across the whole union. This is a survey of our primary stakeholders and partners, what they think about what we're doing and where we could improve. So it's not the naive, it's not Nora in Romania with a sore knee. It's the people like yourselves and the others listed on who we communicate with or engage with directly. In the 2022 survey, the distribution of the responses was similar to what it is in most of our surveys. So around half of the stakeholder groups responding was from pharmaceutical industry. You can spot yourselves in there as well. And the partner organizations was dominated by national competent authorities. And these percentages are typical of what we see in most surveys, most communication perception surveys. Okay, in terms of the highlights, in general, we were pleased to see that there was a high satisfaction with our communication and people are aware of our main products and use them. People tended to be aware of the digital platforms and social media channels that we use. And thank you for being actively involved in the dissemination of our communication materials. And we spotted that's both internally within organizations and externally. In terms of the respondents, we were delighted to see that people claim that they read our communications at least once a week, and about a quarter share them at least once a week, which we're delighted with. But of course, we'd always like to improve those numbers and make them higher if we can. In terms of quality, most respondents were positive and agreed that the agency is open and transparent. Over half agreed that EMA engages sufficiently with stakeholders. The majority of journalists have said that our communication to the media specifically has improved or much improved in recent years, which is, I'm sure, good for you and your team to hear, Monica. And in terms of coordinating public information, there is agreement around efficiency and use of the early notification system. So in terms of the main findings, I've just pulled out a few here. With so many questions, it's a very rich survey. I've just tried to pull out a few key points that might be of interest to you to stimulate a discussion. So first of all, just in terms of the importance of our communication for the people who responded to the survey, over half said it's indispensable, which given the nature of the respondents and the target audiences of this survey, is perhaps not so surprising, but still good to know that we are of use and indispensable or important for almost all of the respondents, including yourselves. In terms of what the respondents use the materials for, I suppose there are a few surprises that the majority use it for their work or that within their own organizations, and they disseminate the information and they use it as a source for their own or for their organization's communications. In terms of using the materials we provide to our stakeholders and partners, we sort of have three levels of engagement that we always measure in these surveys. Firstly is reading, secondly is disseminating, and thirdly, the most challenging one is to take the information and reproduce it somehow or use that information in new materials. So these distributions are typical for what we see. It's common to see that the activities that require more effort have slightly lower levels, but we're really pleased to see that it's not a dramatic drop from reading to dissemination to reproduction. Now, when you break that down across the various stakeholder and partner groups, you can see that the distributions are more or less the same, but there's a difference in the magnitude of them. And perhaps to make it easier to spot yourselves, patient and consumer organizations, 73% reading, 50% dissemination, and 10% reproduction. I've also highlighted NGOs, sorry, not-for-profit organizations and individual patients and carers there, which might be of interest. Now, we're delighted to see those figures, but of course, we'd always like to increase them. So it'd be good in the discussion session, perhaps to look a bit more into detail about what we could do and what you could do together with us to improve those and make things easier for you to disseminate and reproduce. These are the types of things that organizations such as yourself do with the information. So people share it internally, on intranets or newsletters, for example, social media, externally through websites and through other channels in these proportions. I don't think there are any surprises there, but it's good to have these things confirmed, of course. This time, I think it was for the first time, we also included some questions about the what we call the audience landing page for patients and carers. We included all of them, but I've just included this one for this meeting. And this was the distribution that we saw. So in blue is all respondents. So you can see that people looked a few times a year on average at that page. But understandably, if we just filter that down to people who identified themselves as patients and carers, then they claim to view that page a few times a year, around half of them, so it's slightly higher. This is only individual patients and carers, not organizations in this particular breakdown. But it was helpful for us to get a sense of how useful those pages are, but we can also discuss that in more detail if you'd like to. And then just to round off, this was the kind of over the big $10,000 question: how do you rate external communication by EMA? And we are really pleased to see it's very high, and we can compare these figures over the years. Yeah, we were delighted to see it was so high after such a challenging few years. In terms of stakeholder engagement, a similar pattern. There are a few more don't knows here, understandably, but again, the relative distribution is similar with engagement and with the external communication. And finally, in terms of comparing ourselves against other organizations, I'm sure my colleagues will be delighted to see that in general, EMA is rated as better than or as good as other similar organizations in the vast majority. We've just pulled out a few comments here. Some of them may be your own, I don't know, but these demonstrate the spread of the feedback that we got, which we really hold dear. It's probably a little bit small for you to read, so I'll read them out for you. First one from a patient or carer was: my experience says that EMA is really open and transparent. I've been using EMA's communication materials for many years. EMA's communication is also honest and timely. Another patient or carer said, public versions of documents are always made available within a reasonable time frame. Transparency is one of the things I've always admired about the European Union's institutions. Thirdly, a representative of a patient or consumer organisation. You are the EU model on stakeholder engagement. Thank you. Thank you to the person who gave us that comment. It's really what we'd love to hear. And finally, a representative of a pharmaceutical industry organisation. EMA's external communication during COVID-19 was very active, and we would like to see this approach implemented for non-COVID areas. Moreover, we found very useful the bi-weekly press briefings live streamed for the general public during COVID-19. Of course, it's not all good news. We identified some areas for improvement from the survey, and I'll just give you a few key highlights of what those are. As we often find in these surveys, there's often a strong call to further tailor EMA's communications to meet the needs of specific partners, particularly within the EU regulatory network, such as EU institutions. Engaging researchers and academia came up as an area that could, more activity in the area would be desired by those groups so that they understand EMA and can use EMA's materials in their work. We also identified that there's an opportunity to increase awareness of some of the communication tools and platforms that we use. For example, our YouTube channel, where our videos are stored at the present, and the Ask EMA service, where people can ask questions to get information or documents from EMA. Finally, there is another slide. So the fourth one is ensuring that the materials we produce, particularly audiovisual and visual materials, are available and easily accessible via the corporate website. There are some specific questions there this year about whether our stakeholders and partners would like to find all of our images and audiovisual materials in one place, as well as in the topic areas on the website. And this area for improvement speaks to that. As we often find, not surprisingly, there's a call for us producing more information in languages other than English. There are always improvements to make to the structure, design, and functionalities of the website to improve navigation and use. As you've mentioned yourselves, there's always a call to increase our use of visual materials, and finally, expediting the publication of video recordings of workshops and public meetings. Our stakeholders in general found the delay sometimes a little bit longer than they would like to see. So those are the highlights I wanted to present to you. As I said, we'll be able to share with you the full report. But we've just got a few questions to put to you for us to discuss over the next few minutes. So firstly, do any of these findings surprise you or interest you? What can we do, and we as EMA and yourselves, to increase dissemination and reuse of EMA's content and materials? And finally, what could this group do to increase reach and engagement with audiences in EU countries?